shadow right here that I can't figure out what to do about. I don't know where it's coming from. It's a weird one.
There's like a little ghost in there with you.
We're just gonna go with it. Because you know what, I can't complain because it's like cold, it's fall and cold like today, and y'all are in warmer places. It's all right. I'm only a little jealous.
Some of us are also on the East Coast, so I'm like some folks are also tuning in from cooler shores.
Right. Okay. Right then. Oh wait, let's talk about that ring. All right. Well, I'm sorry. Substance. We're having a substantive conversation. You guys, it's only Tuesday afternoon, and I feel this has already been the longest week. Anyway, it's fine.
Oh, I know. Every week between now and the election, every day is like, is it really not Friday yet? That's weird. Thought it was Friday. It's like Monday at 8 a.m.
And you know what? We're all going to be giving thanks for when Thanksgiving comes is that Thanksgiving came. We're going to be like, it's here. Oh, it's been a long time getting here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like it was worth it.
Hopefully we'll know the results of our election by then. Anywho. Okay, sorry. Did you want to do something formal? Go ahead. Go.
I have to do some of the housekeeping. So my name is Carmen. It's so nice to see everyone on the line. My pronouns are she, her, in the interest of what we talk about at the Jane Club, which is honoring the work of women and recognizing the paid and unpaid labor that so many women do and how undervalued that they are in so many spaces. I just want to thank Sally for being here with us today, for giving us so much time.
Sorry, I love you. That was fantastic. In the spirit of people doing unpaid things, I want to thank Sally for doing an unpaid thing for us.
Paid and unpaid labor.
You're my friend and I love you and you asked it, of course. And come on, this is what the sisterhood is all about. Sisterhood,
yes, and I'm super excited.
As inclusively as possible. Continue. Sorry.
Well, and I'm just going to hold up Sally's book too, the opposite of, hey, I have the hardcover version. There's an updated, edited paperback version now available. It remains one of my favorite reads pretty much of all time. I come back to it often, lots of amazing lessons in there that I'm excited to talk to you about today again. I've talked to Sally about her book many times. And before we get going, I do want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which I am in Los Angeles, which is the Tongva tribe, and their elders past and present. And as we gather, obviously, with folks from all over in our connected online community, just take this moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this country, the indigenous peoples and their elders past and present everywhere. Today, my highest intention, and I'm sure Sally's highest intention, is that our words and language do not cause harm to each other or to those of you tuning in. I will hold that intention throughout, and I am excited to stand in feedback if I fall short. Also, you might notice we're recording. My final housekeeping note is that we're recording this session internally for Jane on Demand. So we just ask that no one else records it and that it is saved for viewing internally. And then I have some questions for Sally to kick things off. I also am hoping that we can do some light conversational role playing. But if you have questions that pop up, feel free to just drop questions in the chat along the way. I'm sure that, we can take all of the questions. There's time for everyone's questions. And yeah, my first question is that this is a contentious election, and it's been a contentious 4 years, and people have been asking, how do I talk to people who disagree with me? And I just kept thinking, Sally Kohn, friends with Republicans, and thinking that what an arduous task that has always sounded like, but especially recently, it sounds like this impossible feat. And so I'm kind of curious, we all feel like we have to engage people around us in these conversations. How have you built relationships with people who disagree with you and also made space in those relationships for these kinds of conversations?
Okay, so first of all, thank you. Great question. Great discussion. No. Look, all lightheartedness aside, and I'm so sorry, but the times we're in demand either high amounts of self-medication and day drinking or cynical humor. I personally like I hope, healthy combination of the two, but so we will try to handle this topic with the mix of gravity and holy God, help, how can this be happening sort of dose of humor / shock that feels appropriate. I also want to say, by the way, that the sort of public speaking and media coach that I am with most of my professional time on the side right now, and like Zoom presentation trainer is all like, look at the camera, except Emily, your cute little baby is all, I'm all, look at the baby. It's a good thing. And we all need a dose. So anybody who's not looking at who has like presenter mode and isn't doing gallery mode, you want to go over and look at the cute baby, just here and there. If anybody has a dog they want to put on, like these things this is like palliative in this moment. You know what I mean? Like there you go. There's a dog. Thank you so much, Heather. Well done, everybody. Okay. Now y'all are going to be like distracting me with like stuffed animals. It's going to be great. All right. So let me just start by giving some context, which is that I was a community organizer for about 15 years. In my case, that meant that I worked for a number of national organizations, and I spent my time and energy traveling around the country, helping small groups of concerned folks work together to make change. And it was on a number of issues, from criminal justice reform to LGBTQ rights, to immigration reform, to healthcare policy, across the board. And then one day I sort of fell into doing media. I mean, really, truly, that's what happened. Someone saw me speaking on a panel at an event. They were in TV. They kind of recruited me. It was sort of this weird happenstance. And it was never something I set out to do. I didn't own a TV then. I don't own one now. I think it's mostly garbage. Certainly cable news. And get this, it's worse now. Anywho, but the funny thing that happened in the middle of all that was that I ended up being hired to work at Fox News for 2.5 years as not as your standard Fox News fare, but as I thought super gay. Although, funnily enough, that was a surprise to some of them. They're like, you're gay? And I was all, I work so hard to make it obvious. How did you miss this, Sean Hannity? But as a openly gay lefty at Fox News, as you might imagine, that is a weird experience. And we can put aside the conundrum of Fox News for a second. The fact that I talked to all my friends who were organizing the anti-Fox News campaigns before I even considered going on the network and all of that. And the actual stories of what happened are in the book, so read the book. But the short version here is, in addition to the people I'd always known, right? Family members who were conservative, but who I didn't sort of think of as capital C conservatives. When you meet the capital C conservatives, the ones who you think are going to be completely, totalistically, stereotypically just mean and nasty and hateful, and not like in the abstract, specifically to me. And don't get me wrong, they have a lot of hateful views, they say a lot of hateful things, sometimes are even interpersonally rather nasty, but are not only that, are not completely that. Brene Brown has said that it is hard to hate people up close. And that is it. If you're there are a couple of things I hope you'll take away that are concrete from this conversation. That's one of them, that it is just hard to hate people up close because you see their humanity. And by the way, the flip side is also they see yours. So that really, it put me in this unusual position of being a, professional dyed-in-the-wool, not just Democrat, but I mean lefty, progressive movement activist, and spending my time with Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly, and by the way, the guests, the Kayleigh McEnany's and the Kellyanne Conways and the Sean Spicers. You're right. And we can have a whole other conversation about how a lot of them changed and how, once you join a cult, the cult corrupts you. But the bigger lesson here is, okay, it's one thing to say, how do you go and how do you handle those people? And the truth is, those are, like, a lot of us have professional friends. There are people in our workplaces who we do, whatever their political views, that may be the issue, that may not. We don't see eye to eye with them. We don't necessarily think of them as our besties. The point of me going on Fox News was never to persuade Sean Hannity. I was never going to do that. It was to talk to his audience. And you got to bear in mind at the time, and it may still be true, I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but at the time, Fox News had more Democrats watching than MSNBC or CNN combined. So suddenly I have an opportunity to talk to a really large amount of Democrats who, disagree with me, automatically don't. So that was the sort of forging ground, for some sort of unusual relationships and even some friendships, which I will say, Carmen, have been tested in this current political environment. It is new terrain, but still, I got some lessons from it.
That was my next question was, has the way you walk this line changed in the time of Trump, the way that you navigate? Because what I love about the book, what I still love about the book is, obviously these are all to different scales, but this idea that you can talk to your conservative coworkers, to conservative family members, because there are people out there in the world who are literally forgiving and engaging in conversations with people who have committed legitimate acts of atrocities against them, that there's this human capability to transcend the stuff that divides us, to transcend all of that thorny stuff and really have a conversation. Because I do think, I've had many conversations that were not productive, because what it really is like two people yelling the thing that they think at each other for the adrenaline rush. Also fun and highly recommended. But what's the difference? Like, what changes it into like a productive conversation, and how has it changed for you in the last 4 years? Like, what are some of the newer things that you're learning on the ropes in this time?
So let's unpack a lot of what you just said. So, right, the foundational premise, at least for the book, was to go through and have these experiences, talking to people, let me put it in this context. And I started writing the book in 2016. So I watched this transition in our, political discourse, if you will, in this country, and the sharpening of the partisanship and animosity on both sides, in fairness. Because I watched friends who would say, oh my gosh, any Trump supporter in my family, that's it. I'm done talking to them. I'm writing them off, or even more so, I'm ostracizing them. They're uninvited from family events. They're like, they need to be punished for their views. I heard people say this in non-sarcastic in genuine ways. And obviously that's an expression of hurt, feelings of betrayal, in addition to the fear of what voting for Trump means. So it's not to diminish those feelings at all. And at the same time, I'm traveling to places, working on this book, meeting people who literally are now living next to, in places like Rwanda, living next to the people who participated in the genocidal slaughter of their loved ones, and are able to find a way to forgive. It's a huge word, a huge concept, and heal and move on without diminishing the past or diminishing what happened. And you gotta sort of stop and say, whoa, right? If they can do that, it means two things, right? It means, how can we, the people who say, I'm making some political assumptions about y'all, but the people who identify as sort of center left and progressive, who tend to live in coastal cities, tend to identify as feminists, how can we say that we believe in the equal dignity and humanity of all people, and then say that certain people, based on things that they've done or believe, are crossed off that list? So like, we put a big asterisk in our notions of inclusion and justice and equality, except for them, because they sort of, they don't deserve it anymore. Right? That, to me, on a moral level, doesn't fly. That is not my definition of treating people with full recognition of equality, justice, equal dignity, and humanity. But also, there's a pragmatic piece to this, and this is the piece for this conversation I think is most useful, to operationalize this. So, right, you gotta get, the first part here is get good with your heart, right? One way of thinking about this is, when you look back at this moment, undoubtedly, we are all gonna look at the Trump supporting folks we know and the Trump supporting folks in general with some mix of sadness, remorse, regret, shame. We are ashamed of them, especially if they're people we know and love. We hope they look back with that sense. The other thing is, do we want to look back in this moment and know that we were our most compassionate, just, dignified inclusion? Do we believe in the possibility of change? Those of us who say we believe in social change, do we really believe that people can change, right? You believe that someone is not the worst crime they ever committed, as Brian Stevenson would say. So are they also not the worst person they've ever voted for? Do we believe that? So that's a moral question. And once you figure out where you are on that threshold, then there's a pragmatic piece. And the pragmatic piece is, okay, when you want to have the conversation, and you don't have to, this is not required. This is like, you're putting on your own oxygen mask on the plane. If you all remember planes, like, you got to protect yourself first. You don't have to do this. You can protect your own sanity and safety, so you don't have to do it. But if you choose to do it, then how do you do it in a way that actually is effective?
Right. And I mean, I love that, you talk about not diminishing what has happened. And so for you, like, there's a part in the book where you share sort of what it was like talking to Sean Hannity, someone that you considered a friend while you were working there, and after you left, and you sort of had to be like, hey, you're saying stuff that directly diminishes the idea that my family is valid, that my family is real, that the people like the love I have for these people somehow isn't, like, you had to have this really sort of, you're really putting yourself out there. And I know a lot of people say that that's like, oh, I can't do that because it's diminishing, it feels like engaging in that conversation somehow validates these really painful things that people can say.
Someone just said that in the comments. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so how did you move past, like, I'm just trying to imagine you in that moment. I'm trying to imagine what I would do if someone was like, I don't believe in gay marriage. And I was like, gay married with children. And I'm just imagining, like, how did you move past the rage, the shame, the anger, and like get into a space in your head, in your heart, where you could even move into the conversation? Like, how do you manage that acrobatic act?
So part of it is bearing in mind, I'm not always there, and I've made a practice out of this, right? And it is on some level it is akin to a moral, as I said, there's a moral dimension and a practical dimension. It is a practice. It does not mean I am perfect. It does not mean that sometimes I don't throw up my arms. I want to be like, are you crazy? Are you ridiculous? You're homophobic. You're racist. Sort of, that doesn't say that I don't sometimes feel that way, and sometimes even sound that way. The only way I can describe this, and again, this is without, like, I'm not saying there's a right way, a wrong way, or whatever. I'm saying this is my way, right? And it is a way I happen to know is effective, based both on experience and on research about how people change their minds. How do we change our minds? But it's also based on my own growth, my own learning, my own enlightenment, for lack of a better word. Because I will tell you, I did not start out. I am far from perfect. I am far from perfectly enlightened. I did not start out as quote unquote woke on any number of issues. I wasn't then where I was now, right? I had to be taught and enlightened and brought along on not only, by the way, issues of race and issues around, say, Islamophobia and trans issues, but even issues that I personally relate to, right? There was tons I had to learn about anti-Semitism, tons I had to learn about feminism and misogyny, tons I had to learn about sexual orientation and internalized homophobia and sort of all that. So it's not like, so someone, in fact, a number of someones at multiple small and big points in my life had to be compassionate and patient and believe that I could change and grow. So who the hell am I to get on my high horse now and assume that no one else can? And this is, I guess, here we go. This is the pragmatic piece of it, frankly, right? Which is like, I would encourage you to interrogate your own morality vis-a-vis others, because I will just be, to put it in more blunt terms, my moral objections to folks on the right is that so much of their politics and worldview is defined by exclusion and otherizing and demeaning people because of who they are or what they believe, and enshrining that dehumanization into policy. So I try to make it, if I believe that is wrong, then by God, I think what I do should be opposite. right? I should be celebrating, recognizing, lifting up our humanity, our fundamental capacity for compassion and connection, right? Even if it's only, you know, in the most optimistic sense, at least that's what I stand for. But let's come to the pragmatic piece. I keep teasing it because here's the thing. You can all think of something that you changed on, right? I know people in my lifetime, I know people in my family who are today less homophobic than they were 20 years ago. Without question. And I can tell you 201, for them and for all the folks I've talked to who have done 180s, I'm talking ex-neo-Nazis, former terrorists, people who held intensely hateful views toward one group or another, none of them who changed because someone yelled at them. Just didn't work. The things that I learned and growed on, learned and changed and evolved on, I did not change because someone yelled at me. Yelling feels cathartic. That's fine. It's sort of like, I don't know, if you got kids, maybe not the baby, but soon you'll learn yelling at your kids feels super cathartic. It doesn't actually do a damn thing, right? It doesn't teach them anything. It doesn't change it, right? So the pragmatic piece here is listen, I am mad as hell at people who voted for Trump in 2016, mad as hell at the people I know who voted for Trump in 2016. Let me just tell you, I don't want them to do it again. And if I just stop with my anger, that's as far as I get, and I don't turn it into constructive action, then guess what? They're not gonna change. I'm not helping them change. I'm not doing anything. I'm writing them off. I am convinced. I'm saying you are, right? And that's it. That's all you are, and that's all you ever be. And the final point I'll make here, by the way, is that we are all such complicated people. And we accept that with our friends, with the people who, for whatever reason, we've decided are on our side, right? So I've got friends I don't agree with on 100% of the issues, but I don't interrogate them. I don't walk into that, a party with them when we have parties thinking oh my gosh, I have to deal with Cindy because of her views on abortion rights. I don't do that, right? And the truth is, by the way, I voted for Hillary in 2016, obviously, but I do not agree with Hillary Clinton on 99% of issues. I don't know, we could come up with the percentage, but it's probably, right? Everyone who voted for Hillary Clinton is not Hillary Clinton. Everyone who voted for Donald Trump is not Donald Trump, right? Everybody who watches Sean Hannity isn't Sean Hannity. We have this way of conflating them with their leaders, even though we demand to be treated as distinct from and able to dissent from our leaders on our side. That is not fair. And again, I hold fairness as a core value.
Right. And I mean, in your book, you talk about, white supremacists who are now racial justice advocates. And Marika, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, just asked, how do you hold space for people who aren't ready to learn or change? And you talked about that things have changed in the last 4 years, that we're getting, extremism is a lot more mainstream, I think, these days.
I figured it out. I figured out where the shadow was. The shadow's right here. Right, no, okay, go ahead, sorry.
Well, how do you suss out,
all right.
How do you know going into a conversation sort of, because I've done a lot of work in feminism, right? My people are not, oh, let me convince you that feminism matters. My people are I talk to feminists and try to make them sharper and better and try to grow our community. So how do you gauge this is worth my time or this isn't worth my time? And how do you engage with someone who's sorry, you're not going to change my mind, do something else?
So part of, if you look, and this is not for the weak of stomach. There is plenty to say about living in your bubble. I live in a bubble, right? I'm surrounded by people for the most part who agree with me politically. I find that very comfortable. I don't have a problem with that. However, when I go to family events and when I, go to television and when I do talk radio with friends, I am in fairly regular contact with a lot of people, including a number of Trump supporters, and who are very public Trump supporters. So bear in mind, their cognitive dissonance is even greater, right? They are unwilling to even yield on a point here or there, right? They are publicly defending him. So those are even harder conversations. So the truth is, you don't have to do this. You don't have to put yourself into those spaces, but sometimes we're going to find ourselves in them anyway. And the first thing is, right, is to bear in mind, let's get to the practical tips. One, bear in mind that most people's political views are feelings. They're not facts. Now, we happen to think ours are facts, right? Oh, I believe we should have a path to citizenship for undocumented Americans because of data point, data point, data point, data point. But the truth is, if you stop and interrogate how your opinion on whatever it is, abortion, immigrant rights, climate change, gun control, you name it, what you probably did, if you're being honest, is you decided how you felt on that issue. And then you backfilled the facts and data to rationalize your position, right? Because it's not like you went and said, I don't know what I think about immigration reform, so I'm going to read like 4 reports on the left and 4 reports on the right and 3 books from this side and 3 books from this side. I'm going to take all the evidence and I'm going to noodle on it and decide. No, we don't do that. We have feelings about what's right and what's wrong, feelings that come from how we were raised, where we went to school, who we interacted with, feelings that are, by the way, cultural realities, right? That's why we're the coastal elites, right? That have certain views. We're more likely to have those views. So we have these feelings. And here's the thing about feelings. I don't know if anybody's ever been to couples counseling, but let me save you a couple $1,000s. Feelings are valid just because they're felt. So if my partner says, you hurt my feelings, I can't say, no, I didn't. I mean, I can, but it's not going to work, right? Because they're her feelings. So she feels hurt, right? So the first thing is it's acknowledging and separating out facts from feelings. And when you argue with people's facts, right, and you argue with their views, right, because you think you're arguing about facts, what you're actually doing is arguing with their feelings. And what you're saying is your feelings are invalid. And by the way, when we hear that our feelings are invalid, you know how we feel? We feel like we're invalid. And we could talk about this tactically at the sort of macro communication level, but the fact is a lot of the reason that, and we know this from data, that Trump supporters, even who have doubts and concerns, are digging in their heels. And he's been masterful at manipulating this, is because he has projected this notion that he is being attacked because his supporters are being attacked, right? Because people think they are this and that, and right? And sorry, we got some sirens. Hello, New York. And if people, so we can forget it for a macro second, but someone's in front of you who doesn't agree. And by the way, to understand how someone is feeling is not to validate how someone is feeling, right? Again, couples counseling 101, I can acknowledge and address how my partner is feeling without agreeing that she should have her feelings hurt. Those are 2 entirely different things. So that's point number 1. Point number 2. When we want to persuade people, we need, gosh, it's going down. All right, we need this part of the brain to be involved, right? This is the prefrontal cortex. This is where rational thinking happens. This is also like known as the upstairs brain, right? This is where oh, good Lord, they've brought out the other sirens. Are you guys okay? Can you hear me all right? Is it like artful background noise? All right, because there's like, now they brought that one that goes like, all right. All right, so you need this part of the brain to be engaged, right? This is the prefrontal cortex. However, when there is an argument, by the way, this is when we are in an argument or when we are watching an argument, our prefrontal cortex shuts down and the lizard brain, right? The fight or flight brain, old brain, downstairs brain turns on. And that means you're no longer thinking, you are just reacting. And you are picking sides. And what side are you going to pick? You're going to pick your side. So we just go, and we're doing it back here, right? We're like 2 lizards fighting. We're not actually having any persuasion going on at all. For persuasion to happen, for this part of the brain to stay engaged, you need to have a conversation. A conversation. And that is really hard. It is really hard when we want to just say, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, and here's why. But the question is, what are you more invested in? Are you more invested in you being right or in them being transformed by your conversation? That's it. That's the question you got to ask yourself. If you just want to be right, then God bless you. Go out there, get in an argument, push your facts, make the other person feel wrong and attacked. Great. You will walk away feeling super vindicated and righteous. If you, however, want to try to change someone else's mind, and by the way, this is old stuff. We know how persuasion works. We know it from people who work in sales. We know it from all history of political research, right? And social science and psychology, right? That persuasion doesn't happen that way. So if you want to actually change someone's mind, you have a conversation. This is an old organizing adage. You meet them where they are at. You do not leave them there, but you meet them where they're at.
I love that. And I would love, speaking of tactical, I would love if folks have very specific sort of, who is the person you came to this event because you're thinking of? What is it that, what is the major issue that's sort of defining their passion? And I'm just reading Joanne's question.
Yeah.
Folks who are not understanding privilege, and that's why they're voting for Trump. That is a really hard one. Sally, how would you sort of, and I guess part of this too is like, how do you de-escalate that argument? Like, you have a strategy in the book where you sort of flip what could be an argument about immigration into like a conversation about facts about the economy as a tactic for just getting people to sort of break out of that mindset of like, I'm just right about this, right? So what do you do when someone's just resistant to that information and turn it into a conversation if it starts escalating?
So this is the thing, you're not doing this. This is classic jujitsu, right? They come at you like this and you go, ooh, right? Like, I'm not doing that. And they're expecting you to do this, right? Like, part of the current conservative mentality that has been carefully cultivated is this: we are the ones under attack. We are the ones, right? We are the ones who need protecting, aka Nixonian law and order, racist crackdowns. We are the ones who are becoming the minority and our culture is disappearing. Now it's also, we are the ones who are afraid to speak because we're not woke enough and so forth. Now, again, underneath all of that, there's a lot of stuff that I find super, super, as the kids might say, triggering and problematic. And under that, I can also find some stuff I understand, right? Let's bear in mind, if someone doesn't like the idea, is afraid that I'm afraid to say anything or people are going to think I'm racist, what is underneath that? I could take a lot of problematic cuts at that, but one cut I could take is that person doesn't want to be racist. They're not saying, I'm really annoyed that my racism is now problematic. Like, no, they don't want to be attacked as racist. And guess what? We have that in common, right? Or just fear in general. I mean, this is another classic example for me of this is when I talk to people in Kansas, and by the way, they're not always Republicans. A lot of them are Democrats who, certainly pre-COVID times, right? And pre this sort of latest quote unquote law and order crackdown against Black folks, the crackdowns before that were against Muslims. And you talk to folks in places like Kansas, and they'd say I have nothing against Kansas, but I have, don't mean to roll my eyes when I say Kansas, but this part of Kansas is, to me, a little whack. And they would, okay, now we're going to just keep moving with the sun. There we go. They would say they were worried about Muslim terrorism. Now, let me be clear about something. We know the stats. You know that white violent extremists, generally white right-wing extremists, are 3 times more likely to commit mass violence in this country than Muslim extremists. However, we also know that acts of mass violence committed by Muslims are covered 3 times more in the media than acts of mass violence by Muslims. So when someone in Kansas comes to me and says, I'm worried about Muslim terrorists, first of all, it would be stupid of me, let's just use the word, it would be stupid of me to blame them for those views, because I have looked at that data and I have written about that data and I have said, boy, if we keep up this messed up coverage and dishonesty about white right-wing extremists, it's going to lead to this bias. Well, now people have that bias. I can't just say, oh, that's because they're Islamophobic bigots. That might also be part of it, but you can't disentangle it. And so why not give people just enough of the benefit of the doubt for them to feel validated and open to hearing something different? Also, by the way, they're afraid of dying. And guess what? Me too, right? There was a certain stretch of time. Now I worry about other things if I'm in public, but up until now, I couldn't pretty much go on a packed subway and not be thinking about what happens if. So I get that and I can relate to that. And common ground is how we start conversations.
Right. And so that sort of moment of being like, it doesn't surprise me that you're saying that because I know this information and how it has warped, sort of removing the idea that it's a personal fault, right? From the conversation, just being like, okay, that is a valid opinion because I know all of the numbers that tell me that this is what the media wants you to think.
But removing some of the condescension from it and assuming that people are doing the best they can with the information they've been given. And again, like I can't, genuinely historically say that you have a national party responsible for half this country that has for 50 plus years stoked racial resentment. And then say that racial resentment's evidence in their voting base is entirely because those voters are just racist. Like it doesn't square, those two realities don't square. And in fact, but I also can't kind of go in and be like, oh, you poor you've been suckered and taken advantage of, and you're not voting in your self-interest and sort of all of that, because that's condescending too, right? People are actually, here we go, you ready? I happen to be a bleeding heart liberal, and I believe that people, are trying to do their best. And most people want to do good and be good. I believe that. Or at least I want to believe it. And so acting that way is how I make it more true.
Well, and Heather wants to know, how do we bring those kinds of things up without being condescending or making people feel like we're being condescending?
Carmen, you answered it. How do you actually not be condescending? You don't feel condescending. That's the answer, right? You actually have some humility about your own. And again, I personally find this to be helpful. For me and my own journey in these conversations, I find it to be helpful to remember the things that I had some pretty messed up views on once upon a time. Right? Because of my upbringing, because of my lack of exposure, because of my parent, but whatever, that I just didn't know. Right?
Right.
So I don't want to be condescending. I wouldn't have wanted someone to be condescending to me then. So there you go. Try to actually not feel it. Sorry.
Like easier said than done.
You know what's interesting though? So I have a 12-year-old, and I'm gonna say, like, there are many moments I'm proud of my 12-year-old. The other day, my 12-year-old said, I realize, Mama, it's not most Trump supporters' fault that they're Trump supporters, because if I'd been raised, because we've been talking a lot about cities, and I don't know if you all looked at, there was this great New York Times piece where they pulled out all the electoral data, sort of district by district, precinct. I think they did precinct level, precinct by precinct. And they took aerial shots, like photographs of each precinct. And you could correlate, like verbatim, that the places that were more progressive or voted more blue in elections heavily were more and more progressively concretey, right? Were more built up, were more population dense. And the places that voted more and more and more red, 10 points, 16 points, et cetera, whatever, this is looking at 2016 electoral data, were more green, as in rural, as in far away from people. Far away, they haven't met people who are different. They haven't had to go to school with people who are different. They haven't interacted, right? And so she said, if I'd grown up there, we're talking about a specific person, I probably believe that stuff too. She's not wrong. Right? We can look at the data. We know that. So, you know, we talk about privilege. How about the privilege to have grown up and been exposed to the things that those of us who are progressive, especially those of us who started off in red places, have been exposed to? How lucky us, and how fortunate we are to be able to do that for others.
Right. I mean, I think it is interesting. You know, I have a lot of friends whose parents voted for Trump, and they often found, like, the day after 2016, when they came home, like, crying, being like, how could you do this? That their parents had no idea what they were talking about. Like, they'd be like, but the tapes, the Access Hollywood tapes. And literally someone whose mom lived in North Carolina in a rural area was like, I have never heard of these tapes, which I find shocking. But I mean, if it's not being covered by your local media, if you're not super, like, I am on Twitter all day long. You know, it's easy for all of us to forget that we're receiving information that other people might not be ignoring because they are hateful or whatever. They're actually just, they're not receiving it. And so it's sort of that, and someone's bringing up, you know, like, what do I do if my neighbors are putting up Trump signs? What do I do if my mother married a Republican and she is now voting for Trump and she won't let me, you know, talk to her about it because I'm her child? It's this idea of expressing, I'm going to speak for you and see if you think I'm correct, in this genuine interest of, like, can I ask you, like, what is prompting your support, and, like, what are the issues, like, what is it that is bringing you to this conclusion, and sort of unearthing, like, what is that information source for them that is leading them to make these decisions, and not framing it as, I want to change your mind. It's more like, I want to get to know why this is the thought that you have.
So yes, so a couple things. One is, yes, getting curious, right? Asking questions. Questions super get this prefrontal cortex engaged and get us to be reflective about our own opinions, as opposed to, right, digging in and defensive. What you want is people interrogating why they think what they think. By the way, there's a version of this that has been tested in the political field called deep canvassing. You can go Google it. There's a great New York Times article about it. Instead of, like, the kind of super transactional door thing where it's like, hi, knock, knock, are you voting? Are you voting for Biden? Okay, thanks, bye. These are conversations, short, quick conversations in door knocking that actually can motivate or change voters on an issue. Not obviously deep red and whatever, but and the way it's done is with stories. And it's a specific kind of story that they use. It's a story about someone you care about in your life, and why you care about that person, and why you worry about that person. It could be yourself, by the way, in the context of this upcoming election. You know, I have a friend. She has a really serious neurological disorder. Her medical care costs $100,000 a year. And she is, before Obamacare, she was afraid to leave a job or even make too much trouble at a job about sexual harassment or anything, because if she lost her job, she'd lose her health care because she had this pre-existing condition. That's who I think about when I'm voting this year. Who do you think about? Who do you care about? And getting people to take it out of the political, the abstract, into the personal, interrogate, right? And think about and do something that taps into our notion of the common good, right? Of how we care for and protect each other. You know, by the way, we talk about the prefrontal cortex. There's some really cool new research that's been done. I'm just giving up on the sun at this point, because if I go like this, I'm blind. I don't know what, this has never happened before at this hour. It's like somehow the seasons shifted and the sun's gone crazy. And I was not prepared.
The sun is truly shining on you.
Good Lord, we're just going to keep moving over. Forget the mess. It's getting messier as we go this way. So the prefrontal cortex, they've hooked up fMRIs, right, brain scans, to people while in acts of persuasion. So they hook up a brain scan of the person being persuaded and the person doing the persuading, right? And they watch their brain waves. And again, conversation is what gets the person being persuaded, their prefrontal cortex, to fire. But when it fires the most is when there's storytelling. when the person doing the persuading is telling a story. In fact, this is so cool. I don't know if any of Trekkie fans out there, but they actually start to have a mind meld. The person who is being persuaded, their brain map actually starts to mirror the mind of the person doing the persuading. They are, because stories are about perspective taking, right? The minute you tell me a story, I start imagining myself in that position. What would I do? What would I? So there, yeah, big time getting curious, right? Why do you think that? Who are you thinking about when you vote? Who are you worried about that happening to? Who are you worried about that, person going into that bathroom or what, tell me more. I really want to understand. And then, the other day I was in a bathroom and a trans person came in. And at first I was like, whoa, am I in the wrong bathroom? And then I realized, who really cares? I'm going in a stall. What does it matter? People should be able to pee. The other day I used the men's room at a conference because the lines were too long. Sure glad I wasn't in North Carolina, whatever. But storytelling.
Yeah. And then on the flip side, Nikki before had asked about someone who supports Trump because their business is doing well, ignoring the human rights violations, which I assume means that this person is sort of well aware of how horrible Trump's policies are for human beings, and still is sort of like, well, the tax cuts, the business, I need this stuff economically. How do you sort of engage with someone like that on this empathetic level?
So believe it or not, those are the people who are harder to persuade. Right? So, but it's interesting, right? Because even though that's sort of why, in a way, we've seen more progress on social issues, haltingly, imperfectly, and we can sort of unpack, more on this issue than that issue without getting into an oppression Olympics or anything, but obviously that progress hasn't been even. But greed has been pretty enduring, right? And, a particular version of exploitative, corrosive capitalism has been pretty enduring. Now, even that is starting to rupture, and that's interesting. And that is COVID, and that is this sort of being really clear about how we're all in it together. That is seeing a handful of billionaires profit exceptionally, astronomically, while even the, business folks who we might not have seen eye to eye politically are now having a hard time, making ends meet. So that's kind of a contextual opening, right? That creates possibilities for conversation like this. But it's interesting because there you have almost the opposite of that sort of voting against your self-interest. Like they're like, oh, no. I completely am voting my self-interest and screw all the rest of that. And that is actually a very very, very hard to change people's minds like that because they're not wrong. Correct. Right now, it's different, of course, if there's someone who doesn't have $1 million and they're like, oh, I'm against the estate tax. And you're like, dude, you're never going to have $1 million. Why are you worried about the estate tax? And that's a different kind of conversation you could maybe have. But if it's someone who has $1 million, they have made a calculation like, I want more of that money. And you know what? Now, even still, there are conversations to be had, right? Your workers at your factory take public transportation to get to work, or they take public roads. That's all funded by, yes, I understand. You don't want to have to pay too much, but what do you think the right amount is? Because we got some crumbling roads. And what about the crumbling schools and the kids? If they are coming to work educated, then what do? That's extra costs for you. How do we think about that? Those are the kinds of conversations that can create openings even there. But it is actually harder. And that's interesting. By the way, I'm loving I'm trying to talk and read and all the comments about stories. Yes. And stories can take us out of fear. That is entirely true. It can take us into a sense of shared experience. And frankly, one of the ways we conquer fear as human beings is with community.
Yeah. I also think my own 2 cents as someone who has done a lot of writing about feminism in the workplace, sorry, that's my dog, is that,
hi doggy.
He's talkative today, is just that, you can connect with that person sort of mano a mano. I know a lot of Janes are self-employed, are business owners, are in management and leadership positions. This idea that it's not mutually exclusive to make money and succeed economically without sacrificing your moral values in these other ways. Diversity is good for business. Some workplace protections that employers complain are expensive, like paying for birth control and maternity leave, are obviously really good for business. There's sort of a lot of data that can be pulled in to make the case of like, actually the long-term benefit of the long-term growth of your business kind of hinges on these more progressive policies, because we see this data saying that, America will be X times more ethnically diverse in 5 years. How will your industry keep up? Like these sort of really complicated questions that challenge people to think outside that immediate benefit, maybe of a tax cut that looks great, but is being passed by a monster. So it's just this way of reframing.
Well, and yes, and bear in mind that you gotta be careful about how you use data, right? So there is evidence, we know, that if you just throw data at someone, they will either write that off as an exception to the rule, right? Or they will just literally not hear it, right? If they can't, I mean, this is conceptual frame bucket stuff. If your worldview is A, and I give you information that says B, and you're just gonna be like, no. And incidentally, we're now, of course, seeing that with misinformation and disinformation, which, by the way, is a huge elephant in this room, because now you have people. I'm old enough to remember when I would argue with conservatives, even the prominent ones. We would argue about opinions. We agreed about the facts. We would argue about the perception or the implication of the facts. And now they're making up facts, or someone else is making up facts. They get plausible deniability, and then they amplify the facts, or either way. So that is a whole massive complication of this. The good news, though, is that if you are not relying on facts to make your assertion, again, bearing in mind that your views are also feelings first. Your belief that people should pay taxes, higher taxes, that the rich should be taxed more than the poor, is not based on some, Keynesian economics study you read 5 years ago, and you were like, by George, I think they've got it. We should do that. No, you, for whatever host of reasons, decided that was the right thing. And then you read the Keynes stuff and you were like, yeah, Keynes, okay, right? So that, and same thing. So if you just say Keynes, it doesn't compute, right? So it is like a feeling thing, like, tell me why you think that is. That's interesting. And they listen, and I'm genuinely curious, genuinely understand. How are you ever going to change someone's mind if you don't understand their opinion in the first place? Sometimes we think we understand. We really do, but that is based on such a lumping together of a universe of people. And by the way, in a lot of cases, again, presuming that everyone is Trump, right? Oh, you voted for him. Oh, you must think the way he does, so I'm going to treat you like you're him. And people are just so much more complicated than that. So much more nuanced, so much more multi-layered. People are onions, so you got to peel some layers. And, that can be a little painful. You're going to hear things that are going to make you uncomfortable. You're going to hear things you're going to get your hackles up. I don't know what a hackle is, but we all know ours when they're up. And this is a process of like, and also, how about this? This is like, there's a Zen. This is really, again, I'm trying to give you practical tools, but the sort of like spiritual piece of this is real. And get this, you are not more wrong or less progressive or less woke or less anything because you sit down with someone you disagree with and listen to them in a way that acknowledges their humanity. In my book, literally and figuratively, that actually makes you a better progressive. That actually makes you a real progressive as opposed to a false progressive who is sort of only willing to treat with equality and kindness people who agree with you.
I love it. And I know we have 2 minutes left. So
oh my gosh. All right.
Just want to sort of the cliff notes I'm seeing here are curiosity, conversation, compassion, buying the opposite of hate immediately, following Sally everywhere because she sets this example all of the time. And I mean, thank you so much for being here, for taking this time, for giving us these steps. I know we didn't get to everyone's questions, but I hope folks found this helpful. And obviously we can continue this conversation in Slack. And I just want to, thank our Janes for being here. A reminder that if you post about the Jane Club on your social media and tag us, you can save 20% off next month. And we have so many other election related things. We're phone banking, we're text banking. I'm co-watching the debates tomorrow. Is that tomorrow? That's, oh no, that's Thursday.
Thursday?
It's Thursday.
I don't know. Like I said, time is becoming really weird now.
Should be fun. They'll be muting the mics. So it's going to be a wild night. And if there are non-Janes in here, we're so glad you came here. You can head to thejaneclub.com, use our code for $10 off your first month. And yeah, thank you so much, Sally. Thank you so much, Janes. This was so amazing.
Thanks for having me. Please, folks, if you give it a try, or you had some specific really tough uncle case, they're always uncles. And certainly it's going to, I don't know what people are doing for Thanksgiving. I know we're not supposed to see each other, but you might see your people after Thanksgiving, and who knows, we could still be in the middle of a hairy election or just have resolved a hairy election, and you might have some hairy conversations over a hairy turkey. And if you want to work any of that out or, give pointers or whatever, just say, hey, I tried this and it worked, or it didn't work, reach out. You can find me on all the socials. And thanks. And Carmen, always such a pleasure to see you and your
always so much
foreign tombre.
Yeah, I'm really sad that part wasn't recording. The part where someone went on record and said that my hair looked nice today. But thank you. You look fantastic as well. And it's so great to see your face.
Ditto. I miss the rest of you. Does that sound weird?
No, I feel it. I think we all feel that way.
Thanks. Okay, great. All right, fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right. Bye, everyone.